Demo for the new Score As You Go feature. So starting off, we'll look at this from an authoring perspective. So here I have a relatively brand new project. The only thing that I've done here is added an activity bank question, a multi-input question with two parts. But if we go back to the curriculum, we're going to create a new scored page. And to change, there's a new scoring policy attribute that an author has control over. So the default is score at the end. So this is the traditional way that the system works, where the student answers all the questions and then presses a single submit button when they're finished. There's now, of course, the score as you go option. So in this mode, students will have the questions evaluated as they answer them and their scores updated as they answer these questions. In addition, there's a new replacement policy option, which controls what might happen to the question when the student resets and reattempts that question. So the options here are none or dynamic questions regenerate. So with none, even if it's a dynamic question, after that question is realized and we have some amount of variables that define it, it never changes across the attempts. With dynamic, we will see that, right? We will, every time the student requests a new attempt, they're going to get a new instance of that question, a new set of variables, right? The numbers change in that question. So after setting score as you go, we can go edit this page. And from here on out, the rest of this page authoring experience remains the same. And so if I put in, say, a multiple choice question, and the default here is going to be choice A is correct, and maybe I'll put in actually an activity bank selection. And so this actually also represents a new feature that had to be built as part of this score as you go. So now, in addition to the number of questions that I want to draw from the activity bank selection, I have to select what point value do I want to give to each question that gets selected. And why this is important is that questions from the activity bank, right, because they are drawn randomly according to some set of logic, right, those questions that get drawn can have different point amounts. And so one student could have an attempt with more total points than another student because of the nature of the fact that perhaps a multi-input question gets selected that has two parts and thus it's worth 2 points. And for another student, a multiple choice question gets selected that's only worth 1 point. So this is a feature that now kind of allows a normalization of the scores across the questions that are selected from an activity bank. And so I created one activity bank question of type multi-input. So we'll just construct the logic here to essentially force it to pick that one question. It's a multi-input question with two parts, so it really should be worth 2 points. But we're going to override that by leaving this points per question at 1. So now we have, this assessment has 2 questions, this embedded multiple choice and the activity bank selection that's worth 1. And so this new feature, this points per question, will override, right, the points that come out that would have been yielded from this activity bank selection. And why don't we add, well, maybe that's okay. We'll just have these 2 questions for now. So we can now publish this course and create a course section from it. Okay, so looking at this now from the instructor perspective, some of the key changes for Score As You Go. center on score as you go assessment visibility, right? So for the ability for the instructor to see when they're looking at various views in the dashboard that a graded page is set to be score as you go. And so we'll see that immediately here from the assessment settings view. So this score as you go icon next to the name indicates that that is a score as you go graded page. That scoring policy, right, the scoring mode appears as an assessment setting. So we can change this. The instructor, if they don't want to have these delivered as score as you go, they can turn that off and go back to the kind of default batch operation. They also can control the replacement policy as well. And this icon will appear in some other places, but we won't see that yet until we actually generate some student data. And so let's go ahead and do that. So if I first have to edit this and not require enrollment because I want to use a guest user. And while we're at it, why don't we just generate a quick schedule. And okay, so now that we've done that, we can log in as a student and actually take a look at the student experience. So here, let's see. Student also has some visibility that this page is a score as you go activity, right? So from the course schedule, we see that icon. It clearly says this is score as you go. I click the pop-up here, right? It's giving me more information, telling me that the score is updated as I complete questions on the page. This type of UI appears in a few different places from the student view. But actually going into the page, right, now at the prologue page, and again, it's reiterating this is a score as you go activity. My overall score for this assessment will be the score of my best attempt, right? So for each activity, and that's controllable as well, right? So the scoring policy in the assessment settings now pertains to the individual activity attempts, not to the overall page attempt, because in a sense, there really is now only one page attempt, right? We have multiple activity attempts within that single page attempt. And it's telling me I can attempt each question 5 times. And so if I start the attempt here, I see the 2 questions. I can see I have an overall page score of nothing yet out of 2. And it's telling me also here with this new UI, I'm on attempt 1 of 5 for each of these questions. So let's go ahead and incorrectly answer the first question. And we can see this page score updated automatically to show us we're now at 0 out of 2. And so I tried that question, and perhaps I want to try it again. So I can click reset, and it gives me this warning that, right, if I reset here and try it again, I might actually get another question, right? We know because of the way that we set this, and it's not a dynamic question, that that's not actually possible. But this is the uniform warning that students will get in a score as you go situation. And so if I click reset, that question is now reset. My score remains the same, but now I'm on attempt 2. And so if I answer the question correctly, now my score is 1 out of 2. Moving on to the next question. Remember this question, because it is a multi-input question, it really would have been worth 2 points. But we can already see that normalization feature with the 1 point per activity from that bank selection is already working, right? Because it knows the overall assessment here is only worth 2 points, right? 1 point for each question. But let's answer this partially correct, right? So this will result in what would have been 1 out of 2 points, right? Is now normalized to a half a point out of 1. And you can see my overall score here for this assessment is 1.5 out of 2. And so we haven't we're not done, right? We can try that question again, of course, right? That's the whole idea with Score As You Go. But to show that this is working, we can go and look at the instructor dashboard and look at the quiz scores and see for this guest student, right, that it is showing up now that they have 1.5 out of 2, right? So it is live updating. That is flowing, those score changes are flowing all the way up to, right, the instructor dashboard. If this was an LMS section, those grade updates would be going back to the LMS as the students are answering those questions. And so why don't we just show this thing exhausting all attempts. And so, okay, so now I've taken all 5 attempts. I can no longer click reset. I answered it correctly the last time, but the scoring policy is set to best, right? So even when I answered incorrectly on that like 3rd attempt, my score didn't go down, right? Because it's taking the best result out of those 5 attempts. Let's see. And what's interesting, if I go back here and I change this midstream from traditional presentation mode to 1 question at a time, everything still works. I just have to reset the page. And now we've got Score As You Go working in the presentation mode of 1 question at a time. And so, right, I can reset this question. I can then answer it correctly. And now I've got 2 out of 2, right? It correctly shows the parts over here to the right, which would have normally each been worth 1 point, right? It's scaling that to the normalized 1 point for this question. Also, a UI change that was necessary that isn't actually reflected in the Figma, but I think it was a gap, and I captured this in one of the MERV tickets. The Score As You Go activity has a slightly different header here than the regular graded page activities, because the graded page activity has some language in it that says, answer all the questions and click submit this attempt at the bottom of the page. That doesn't exist, right, in Score As You Go, right? And so this just gives a more specific set of instructions in this header for Score As You Go. Also, you can see here, this overall page score is always visible, right? So if I scroll the page, right, it's sticky in that location. So this is more useful not in 1 question at a time, but perhaps, right, in a traditional presentation mode where we might have 10, 15 questions, right, that require, on the assessment, that require then the student to kind of scroll the page. And so that allows this overall page score to remain visible. Piece for Score As You Go that I wanted to demo is some new behavior that the system implements when a publication is made and applied to a course section to a page revision when there is an active attempt by a student in that page. And so prior to the Score As You Go work, for practice pages, when they detect that a page up revision has been published, they simply automatically move the student forward to that new page content. We can't do that for graded pages. We keep the student locked into that previous page revision until they complete their current attempt. Then on a subsequent attempt, they'll actually see the new page content, right? So if an author publishes a change that adds a question or that fixes a typo in the content of the page, students won't see that in a graded page until their next attempt. Can't really do that for score as you go. That's not really going to work because there's really just one singular page attempt for score as you go. The students can have multiple activity attempts within that single page attempt. And so the implementation here handles score as you go as a special case. And when it detects that there's an active attempt in a score as you go page, when the student visits that active attempt, if the page revision is changed, it will move forward the student to that new page revision, but while preserving all of the state of their activity attempts. And so to demo this, I've got a student attempt in a score as you go page that has 2 questions. And so I'll answer this one correctly. So I've got 1 out of 2, and maybe I'll select both of these, but I won't submit the answer here. And so now if I go back as an author to this course, that's not the course. If I go to the project here and I go to that page, I'll just make a change to the page. And in fact, what I'll do is I'll add a 3rd question. We'll add an ordering question. And if I publish that change and go back to the student's view, if I refresh the page, right, to simulate that I've gone away and I've now come back to visit the page again, you can see I now see that 3rd question. And the first 2 questions, their state is preserved, right? I had taken the first attempt and got it correct. I had not submitted this, but I had those 2 selected, and my score was 1 out of 2, but now it's been shifted to be 1 out of 3 to account for that new question. And if I reset this, right, I'm now on attempt 2, right? So if I've not gained any additional attempts, right, it's still recognized that for that first question, I already taken the first attempt. So that's essentially the new handling, kind of a special case for graded pages that are score as you go, to move the student forward so that they can see the changes in the underlying page revision.